Hey guys, well, we are going to revisit one of my favorite YouTube subjects, the Quadrajet carburetor. You may remember, if you look through my videos and you're a Quadrajet enthusiast or you are repairing one, you've probably seen my videos that I made several years ago. I did a how to debug your Quadrajet series, and I did some videos on the choke and their operation, and I've really got a lot of positive feedback on those videos, and a lot of views, and a lot of questions. And while I feel like those videos are very good videos for the time, the bog videos, now that I look back on them, left a little bit out. So I've decided to make another video to go more in depth on specifically the secondary side of a Quadrajet carburetor and how it works and problems that you may run into with it. That's what we're doing in this video, and it's going to be kind of a long video. I'm probably going to break it up into several different, well, let's hope there's not several, but at least 2 or 3 different segments, depending on how long it runs total. And what brought this about is I've been receiving a lot of questions about a particular issue, not so much a bog, but if you have a Quadrajet and it does not seem to operate on the secondary side of the carburetor. So we're going to explore that. We're going to start from the bottom and work our way up to the top of the carburetor. I've got a carburetor, a three-dimensional carburetor, which is broken into its 3 component pieces. We've got a base plate, we've got the carburetor body, and we've got the air horn, and I've got another air horn from another carburetor that I'm also going to use as some reference. And so this is just going to be a handheld video with my camera. I'm not going to put it on a tripod because the things that you see are going to be close up for the most part, so I'll do my best to not clear my throat and not obstruct things, and we have good lighting, so I think we're good to go on this. So to start off with, now we talked in the other videos way back about bog, how to debog your Quadrajet, and that, for the most part, that series of videos was intended to address a transition problem. In other words, transitioning from the 2-barrel to the 4-barrel wide open throttle, which some people like to call WOT, W-O-T. I don't do that, but some people like that. So we wanted to talk in those videos about that particular scenario, which we did, and I think we pretty much put that to bed. I think by now a lot of people understand about the air doors and the dampener assembly. But we're going to cover now, in this video, we're going to cover more in depth about how the secondary side of the carburetor works. And that means when you go from just cruising along on 2 barrels to you want to punch it and go to 4 barrels wide open, or you're at a standstill and you just mat it all the way to the floor and take off. You know, you want to go into the 4 barrels, and evidently a number of people are having problems, either that they simply don't have the 4-barrel working, or it tries to work and doesn't want to run, bogs, spits, sputters, whatever. So we're gonna talk about that. Now, one thing to remind you guys, that you know, if you're wanting to learn something, you have to stick through and listen to people explain it. So if you don't have the patience, you may want to just, you know, tune on out and get a book or figure it out yourself, whatever. But so what we want to do is we want to distinguish between a 4-barrel Quadrajet 4-barrel, the secondary side, which is not working at all, or it's doing the other thing, which is it wants to work but it's not working right. And it's pretty easy, if you're behind the wheel, it's pretty easy to distinguish between those 2 scenarios, because if you have a 4-barrel it's just not even trying to work at all, there's no 4-barrel there, you punch it and you have no kick in the seat, or you don't hear it, that's pretty clear it's just not even working. So we're gonna have to find out why it's not working. And then the second deal is, you know, you punch it and it sounds like it's trying to do something, you know, but it spits, and you know, as long as you've got your foot down on the floor, it's just, you know, to use a kind of a simplified explanation, it doesn't want to go, you know. It hesitates and surges, and you know, may spit, and you know, it may actually even slow down. As long as you got your foot on the floor, you know, it's just acting like crap. So that's the two situations that we'll look into. So let's take a look through these pieces of this Quadrajet. We're going to start at the very bottom. This is the base plate. This is the driver's side of the base plate. This happens to be a 1970 Quadrajet off an Oldsmobile 455. It's a really good carburetor. It's one of my definite keepers. I have it apart because about 10 years ago I was going to rebuild it, and I never did get to it, but you know how that goes. So we're looking at the side of this base plate. On the side of here we have the connection to the, presumably the connection to the accelerator cable. It's on the driver's side. Accelerator cable is going to pull it towards the rear to open the throttle. So you have your connection here. This is directly connected via shaft, has the primary butterflies on it. This is a 2-barrel, the front primary is a 2-barrel side of the carburetor. And incidentally, on the far side over here, I did a video that's been extremely popular about how to adjust your Quadrajet dual jet fast idle. There's a look at that screw right there. That is not the idle screw. The base idle screw is on the left. That's that fast idle screw I told you about in that video. So when you pull the throttle open, anytime you pull the throttle open on a Quadrajet, it pulls back on this arm. This is the left side. If you're standing at the driver's fender, you're looking into the carburetor. Front the carburetor's here, the rear of the carburetor's back here. So it starts to pull this primary throttle shaft open, and by the time this reaches about 85 degrees of opening, the way this is designed, it has a rod that runs back from the back, from this arm here back to the back, and then this is the secondary throttle blade shaft runs through here. It's got that big old secondary butterflies on it. So the way this works is when this thing, and I'll do the best I can to do this one-handed, and you pull back on it and you get to about 80 degrees, I guess, then it's going to start pulling these secondaries open. You see that? And if you look at this, it almost looks like the primaries are over traveled in this video through the viewfinder, but they're not. They're straight up and down. But you'll notice that normally the secondary blades only open up to about 95 degrees, and that's normal. That's nothing to worry about. It's not, you know, you could do some tweaking on this thing to get it to open up all the way, but that's the way that it physically opens. The back barrel's open on the bottom down there. So I've seen these stick. If they're not being used in a long time, sometimes these things will stick, but it's not that common. And some of the later carburetors are actually designed so that this thing is spring loaded, that you can actually open the throttle all the way up, and if these are stuck closed, it'll still open. This thing will still open all the way far back, you know. But this one's not. This one's got a strictly mechanical connection. So when it gets, you know, like I said, that's half throttle, I guess, but it gets to that point, it starts pulling these back barrels open. So the first thing you want to do is, if you feel like you have a 4-barrel that's not working, and I mean, that's what I mean it's not working, there's no kick, you don't feel it trying to work, you don't hear it, nothing, then first thing you need to go into is you need to look and make sure that, for one, when you push the pedal down in the truck or the car, wherever this thing's on, that the cable is actually capable, is adjusted so that it will pull this thing all the way open. You know, there's been cases that's happened, that people can't get the 4-barrel to work, or the car doesn't run very well, it doesn't know power, you know, they think it's this thing's a turd. And that's what it was. The accelerator cable had stretched so far that it was only pulling the throttle maybe, I don't know, halfway open. So that's the very basic thing to check on this. Make sure that the throttle cable is working properly. It's pulling the accelerator arm open. And then you need to physically look at it. You know, if you think that's okay, or if you've made sure that's okay, then come out to the side of the carburetor, and preferably do this with the engine off and cold. And I'm going to tell you something in a little while to also check that kind of ties in with that off and cold thing. But physically look at this and make sure that these butterflies are opening. Now then, something to keep in mind about these secondary flaps back here. We'll call them flaps for lack of a better word. They're called butterflies or blades or whatever, but we'll call them flaps. On some of the later carburetors, this is a 70 model carburetor. It doesn't have this style of lockout, but it's called a lockout, and it's called a secondary lockout. Some of the later ones have an extended shaft right here. They have an extended shaft. This one's flush, but some of them are extended out, and it has a small pin driven through the end of that thing. And what happens is, when this carburetor is assembled, you can pull up a picture of a Quadrajet if you want to get a, well, let's do this. I have one on right here. And here it is, actually. What luck. We're in luck. If I can get it to not fall off the table on my foot. Okay, take a look here. I'm getting the light back going again. Click, click, click. There's what I'm talking about. That's called a secondary lockout right there. And the way that operates is, you see the choke on this carburetor is closed totally. It's cold. And that pin and that arm keep the secondaries from opening up when it's cold. That's because I don't want the customer to try to floor the gas and take off and it try to open the secondaries and it'd be too cold to do it, and it backfires, stumble like that. Just basically a customer complaint prevention thing. But the way that works is that little tab, the front part of that tab right there, that thing swings down from this choke linkage, and it's buried in there, and I'm not going to show it to you. I'm just going to tell you it's there, and you'll have to explore that on your own. But as long as that choke's closed up, that thing will keep the secondaries from opening. Does that make sense? So that's something to think about. If you're having choke problems, or you're not sure your choke's open all the way, or it's not open all the way, then that definitely, if you still have that lockout in there, that can definitely keep the 4-barrel from working at all. I've seen that happen. So it is vital that you have the choke on this Quadrajet. If it needs to be working right, and I mean right, you have it adjusted right, it opens all the way up when it's hot. Or if you feel like, even though you've watched my videos and you've looked at all this stuff that I put up here, you feel like you're still not capable of fixing the choke on one of these things, then you need to wire the thing open all the way so you don't have that in the equation. I don't suggest doing that because, you know, the chokes on these, they're not hard to fix. You either have a hot air choke or you have an electric choke. They both have their issues, but they can be fixed. So, but you need to remember that. That's crucial, because if that lockout is in place, you won't have a 4-barrel. It won't even try. It won't, and that does not cause it to stumble when you hit the 4-barrel. That's a whole different thing. This is strictly cutting off any possibility the 4-barrel even work. So that's something definitely to always check on these. So now that we got that out of the way, I'm going to put this is my good Pontiac Quadrajet. This is one of the highest performance Quadrajets they made. This is the late 70s, the early 70s and late 60s Quadrajet. Pontiac Quadrajet's even better than that one. So anyway, this this is what we want to ensure in this step, is that we have a carburetor that is physically capable of opening up the back barrels. So check your throttle cable, make sure it didn't stretch, make sure it's adjusted, work the carburetor. Don't do this with the engine running and blow it up. Make sure that the back barrels are physically open. You can look at the back of that shaft, look at this side of it, turn this around the other side of it, you look at the end of it. So first thing you do is get that out of the way. Take that off the table, figuratively. So if you have the back barrels on the bottom of the base plate and you have them working and you're sure that when you punch the gas it opens them up, but you still don't have a 4-barrel, we need to look further. So let's do that in the next segment. Okay, this part will probably be shorter than the others because there's just not much to explain on this part of this. Now, we looked at the base plate and I told you that you need to be sure that your base plate is functional, that your back barrels will actually open on the bottom, the butterflies are capable of opening. So if you do that, if that's happening, it's very, very unusual to not have a 4-barrel that's even working at all. And I mean, I want to clarify that again to make sure that I'm not talking about bogging, I'm not talking about stumbling, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about there's just no 4-barrel. It doesn't work. So I mean, there's no 4-barrel sound, there's no sensation of the 4-barrel kicking in, there's just nothing. It's like you're driving a 2-barrel. So the second thing you always want to check after that, you work your way up and you make sure there's nothing hanging up these air doors. Now, I'm going to actually switch over to my other demonstration because that one's got a specific thing I want to show you. It's unusual, but these are the air doors back here, and these normally open up pretty easily. They have a spring tension on them, and there's not much that will prevent this from opening, but there's something that I've already explained in the other videos, but I'm going to cover it again because you need to understand it. First thing that can happen is sometimes when people screw around with these Quadrajets and they take the bolts out and they've had the thing apart a few times and they're putting it back together, they like to crank down on these where the mountain screws go on this as hard as they can, because they do that, I guess, not because it's a carburetor, but because there's some force in this carburetor that if they don't crank the shit out of those bolts as hard as they can to the point that I'm going to strip them, that whatever that force is will explode out of that carburetor and get them. I know that sounds crazy, but the only thing I can understand is just, there's not, guys, you need to remember something. There's not high fuel pressure. It's not a fuel injection system. There's not high fuel pressure waiting to spray out of every crack of this carburetor. All this thing needs to do is it needs to just lightly set down on the, flatly set on the carburetor body, and then you snug the screws down and alternate it. You don't have to wail on it. But guys do that. They just on and on. So don't do that. So if you do that, sometimes what will happen is this carburetor top of this air horn will warp so bad that these air doors, there's not much of a gap in them anyway, and these air doors will actually hit the sides, like on that side where that comes around, and normally over here on this side where my thumbnail is. This thing will warp so bad the air doors will lock up. The thing, this physically will not open. It's warped. It's stuck. So what you can do is, usually you need to deal with that, you need to take the carburetor off, because you're going to be having to file metal, and you don't want to do that with it sitting on the engine, because that's ought to be self-explanatory. But you can get this carburetor off, and you can identify the areas that are binding up over here, and you can take a little small file or some sandpaper or whatever, and you really need to take this air horn off to do this. I'm suggesting strongly take the air horn off to do that, because otherwise do it at your own risk. So upshot of it is, don't try the metal of the flaps is a lot harder than this pot metal, so sand on this. And I'm not talking about sanding a big gap open. I'm just saying, I'm talking about just clearance it enough that these things start freely moving again. And you know, you can fix a warped air horn if you know what you're doing. There's places that'll fix it for you, but otherwise, if it's working okay besides that, I would just clearance it up. So that can fix that issue. Now I want to show you something that's without confusion. It's really unusual. This old Quadrajet. Look at that. You see that tang that's sticking out above the air door? That is actually the older version of that lockout that I showed you on that newer carburetor. This is the old version. This is how it first worked. This thing, normally there'd be a choke rod coming up and a big piece of linkage that bolts on right here to operate the choke arm. Take my word for it. And it does exactly the same thing. When it's cold, that thing is sticking out right there. And then when the choke goes off, it moves this thing out of the way and the secondaries are open. So we're only talking about maybe 73 on down that has that. Later ones usually don't. They have that other version. So we've moved on. We have identified the problem with the base plate that could happen. We've looked at problems up here. So let's talk now about this thing that most guys have considered their nemesis on these carburetors. They do not understand why this is here, how it works. So let me try my best to explain. Well, it's usually called the choke pull off because that's what it does on an assembled carburetor. Like this one. Boy, this thing's heavy. On an assembled carburetor like this one that does double duty, this thing, when it closes up, when this thing retracts, it has a vacuum line on it that connects to manifold vacuum passage in the carburetor. That's what this is up here. So when the engine runs and you have a lot of manifold vacuum, then it pulls this thing. Look up there. It cracks the choke open. It doesn't control this. All it does is, the way this is designed is, when you first start the engine and the engine first starts up and the choke's on like this, then this thing pulls in almost instantaneously, and it cracks that choke open just a little bit so that the engine does not run too rich when it's cold. Otherwise it would sit there and blow, 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 you know, blow black smoke and all that crap. We've all seen those do that. So it does that, and its second function is to, look back here, it's pulled forward. This piece of linkage is pulled forward on this arm right here, and it will not let that flap back here open up. So what happens is, if you understand how engines run and how they work, you know that at low RPMs there's a lot of manifold vacuum, 16 to 18 inches of vacuum. So it runs your power brakes, runs your heat and air control, it runs your transmission modulator, on and on. So what happens is, when you go to wide open throttle, we're not going to call it watt, when you call it the wide open throttle, when you punch the gas, take a look at what happens. I'm getting my finger coming off of this thing is going to simulate what goes on under the hood. Now this one's kind of old and it moves slow. Normally they move a lot faster than that. That's about accurate. That's a brand new one. So what happens is that's a dampener, and its function is to keep this air door. Now we covered this on the bog videos, but keep this air door from flying open too fast, because you have a big engine, this thing can pull this air door open even if it's adjusted properly. It can pull it open quick, you know. If you got a small little 305 or 307, you know, they don't open very far. It's not a big deal, but that's what this thing is for, and it is supposed to be there. So for all the generations of guys that have been backyard authorities on Quadrajets, that the first thing they did, they said, you need to get that rod off there. That rod's holding it back. Like you're wrong, 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 wrong. Rochester, I've said this before and I'm going to cover it again real quick, but Rochester knew what they were doing. This was not an anti-performance thing. Every Quadrajet just about has ever had one of these. Even GTOs, even 442s, W30s, W31s, Judges, you know, you just find them all over. So they're not, it's not something that's trying to restrict the 4-barrel. That's the, I used to hear that all the time when I was growing up. You need to take that thing off. You need to get rid of that. That thing, you won't kick as good with that on there. You're absolutely freaking wrong. So what you always want to make sure that this is working. And I've had guys, that's the wash machine out there, by the way. I've had guys a lot of times get confused about how that thing works. So I want to again cover that. And we'll go to this one. Good thing I got all this. This is your vacuum line to it. And this is connected to this port here, which is usually in this position. This has got the little nipple missing, but it's got a vacuum line like this one. And this is supplied with manifold vacuum, which is pulls this thing in, pulls it in like that. So I've had guys say that, well, that thing is pulled in all the time, it won't let the 4-barrel open. That's not supposed to happen. If this thing is in, and even with no vacuum line on it, it's still in. It doesn't ever come out under its own pressure like that, spring pressure. It's got a little spring in there where my thumb is. If it doesn't come out, then this is defective. Either that or the linkage is bent or something, but that's how this is supposed to work. This thing comes out as soon as you mat the gas, the vacuum goes away, this thing is free to open. The secondary air doors are free to open up. So that's another thing to check and either get off the list or replace it or fix it, whatever needs to be done. But that's how that works. So hopefully nobody's pulled this off and thrown it away or bent the linkage or done something like that, because that's kind of a pain to deal with if you have. So okay, that should cover every little bit of how you can have a 4-barrel that does not work at all. No 4-barrel, no kick in the pants, no sound, no nothing. It's pretty simple to cover through those. So check through all those things first if you have ones not working. We're not talking about sputtering or popping or lurching or slowing down. We're not talking about a performance problem in that respect. We're just talking about a 4-barrel which works like a 2-barrel. There's no sound, no sensation. So I've repeated this several times, so hopefully we can kind of clear that up and you know what your problem is. So let's move on to now. We want to take a quick study of how the 4-barrel works on these as far as the fuel delivery goes. We've covered air delivery. This is air delivery for the most part, but we want to cover fuel, specifically fuel delivery, so let's look into that. Okay then, you ready to talk about the fuel delivery on the secondary side of Quadrajet? I know I sure am. So we start out with fuel in the float bowl right here. This is your float bowl on a Quadrajet. You've got 2 primary jets down in the bottom. You've got some other stuff that we don't need to worry about right now, because we're specifically talking about the fuel circuit on the secondary side. So we start out with fuel in the float bowl. Now, if you have a performance problem with the secondary side of a Quadrajet, one thing you need to make sure is that you don't have a problem downstream someplace, meaning that you don't have a restricted fuel filter, you don't have a kinked fuel line, you don't have a fuel line that's sucking air back near the gas tank, you don't have a stopped up strainer in the fuel tank. You know, it's just, in other words, go through the fuel system, especially if it's an older vehicle like a lot of these are now. I think the last car that used a Quadrajet was a 1990 Olds Custom Cruiser wagon. That's been, what, 26 years? So these things are all old now. The vehicles that they're on are mostly all old, 25, 30, 35, 40 years old. That tells me how old I am, because I remember when those things were new. But so go through and 100% the fuel system downstream of the carburetor first. You know, before you condemn a carburetor problem, make sure that you're getting plenty of fuel, because you can actually, if you're just barely getting enough fuel to keep fueling the float bowl, if your fuel supply is that bad, you can easily, these float bowls are not very big. In fact, that was a complaint on these carburetors, because they could run them out of gas under certain circumstances. The fuel pump, there's just not enough volume in here to keep the thing full of fuel. So if your fuel supply is marginal to begin with, then you absolutely can run the carburetor out of gas, just keeping your foot in it. Now, normally what will happen is it'll to do that, you'll know it, because you know, you'll kick it down or take off with it on the floor, and it'll run good for, you know, 15 seconds, 10, 15 seconds, you know, and it sounds good and it's pulling good. And then all of a sudden it starts nosing over, and your nose is going towards the steering wheel because you're slowing down. So, you know, and it sounds ragged. Then you let off of it, and it starts to clear up. Finally, as the float bowl fills back up again, it takes off again. You know, you can keep doing that. Punch it, goes for a while, then slows down. Now, don't confuse this with a 4-barrel that will not even try to work, you know, properly. We already cleared up the things that can cause it to not even work at all, but I'm not talking about, you know, a specific issue that I'm going to talk about in a little bit is it tries to work, but it's just not working worth a shit, in other words. So we got to have fuel in the float bowl. That means we got to have a good supply. That means our float, which sits in here, you've seen pictures of Quadrajet floats before, I'm sure. That thing has to be adjusted right. It's not too low, it's not too high. The specs for every carburetor are easy to obtain as far as float height goes. So those are things that can cause problems that are not confined to the secondary side. So check that. But so we have fuel in the float bowl, and then we need to understand how the fuel gets out of this float bowl into down there. So the first thing that we need to understand is that when we look at the bottom, of this air horn, we got a bunch of stuff hanging off of it. But you see those two things in the middle, those two shiny rods? Those are the secondary metering rods. And you'll notice that they're thick, and then as they get closer to the bottom, these especially thin way down. These are nice rich rods, means they have a real narrow power tip on them down there. If you look at different kinds of metering rods on the secondary side, you'll see that they've got anywhere from a thin tip, and some of them like on a small displacement V8, which doesn't use a lot of secondary fuel because of it's a small engine. The rods are thicker, so just like dicks, you got some that are thin, you got some that are thick. And so I don't know, there's a chart out there that's easily found that lists all the different sizes of these metering rods as far as their dimension goes, but I think these are CVs. But this is what admits fuel into your secondary side of the Quadrajet. Your fuel is in the float bowl, and if you look down here, I'm going to turn my light on again so you can get a good look. You see back here in the back of the float bowl, you see there are those two holes in the back. Well, those guys right there, they stay, when this carburetor is assembled, they stay dropped down in there to the point that there's just basically no fuel can get around those. And sorry if this camera is kind of a doofus, but, of course that's exposed to fuel at all times. So what happens is, this can be kind of confusing, and I'll try not to confuse you, but the sequence of events happens here. you pin the gas. The bottom butterflies open up, and then that's, of course, that's coming through here, and then the Venturi principle, which means drop in pressure, sudden drop in pressure, pulls these flaps open. These are ones that are more cooperative. Pulls these flaps open. Like that. So, how are we going to get the fuel in there? Well, I hear the PTSD dog next door again. Look here on the top, and I know this is kind of a, bear with me on this camera work. This is not easy to do without a good director and lighting man here, I guess. But look at this dude up here. You see this little thing that's bolted on? This is your secondary rod hanger. Those rods that I just showed you that are hanging down there, they're hanging. They drop into there when, boy, that thing's a pain. A little pin thing. When this thing, watch real closely, I'm going to duplicate the vacuum signal on the bottom of these flaps. Open it up. Watch what happens. You see that? When those flaps open up, there's a cam right there. You see that? Where that guy right there, there's a little plastic cam in there that's kind of an eccentrically shaped piece of plastic, and that forces that hanger up, and it in turn pulls these rods up. So the further open these air doors open, the farther up that hanger pulls the rods open. So, doesn't that suddenly make a whole lot of sense? Bottom flaps open, top flaps open. When the top flaps open, they pull this hanger up. The hanger pulls the secondary rods up. The secondary rods lift up out of those two holes right there, and the fuel starts to flow. So, now let's be specific about this. Which direction is the fuel flowing? The fuel is in the float bowl, so the fuel is going to flow from the float bowl past those secondary rods into those holes right there, because what's going to happen after that, and I'm going to try to say this slowly because I could confuse myself if I didn't already know what I was talking about, but what's going to happen is the fuel goes in there, drops down in there, the rods have lifted up, and it comes down and makes a U-turn, and it comes up each of these cylindrically shaped areas right here, right there, right here and right here. Now here's what's on the other side of that, and this, you need to try to follow along with me as best as you can. If you need to replay this video several times, be my guest. What's happening is, normally this air horn is mounted on the carburetor. This area and this area is this and this right here. These are your secondary main nozzles. That means that the Venturi, the vacuum signal, is pulling the fuel up past the rods, which is lifted up those two tubes of a thing, whatever you want to call them, whatever you're comfortable with. They're coming up, and they're coming right down in here, and they're going to go make another turn and come right out into the secondary. It's going to go right down in there. That's the basic pathway for the secondary fuel flow on a Quadrajet. And I'm going to go through it again just to make sure we're clear. Fuel in the float bowl, rods pull up because air doors are opening up, goes past the rods down into those holes, makes a U-turn, comes up there, it arrives up here, comes out here. So we know that Now you're going to say, well, what are all those doggone tubes right there? Well, I'll be delighted to tell you, Mr. Bandit. To do that, I'm going to switch over to the other air horn because it's a little bit easier to look at, and I don't have the secondary metering rods hanging around in the way. So we've got 6 tubes on this one. This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. You notice there's 3 pairs. Two these, 2 of the far outer ones, 2 of the far inner ones, or whatever you want to call them. So they all do different things. Each 2 of these do one thing. These 2 do one thing. These 2 do one thing. So let's start out with the most simple one. These guys right here, you see daylight through there? It's looking all the way through to the table right there. That's that one. That one. That is a, what this called, they call that an air bleed. That means that this is stuck down in, this drops down in these holes where that fuel comes up. So you're saying, well, why has it got a tube that gets air into that? What's that for? Well, that's basically, it's kind of a, these things get called different things. They call it an air bleed, or they call it an emulsion tube, whatever. Emulsion means that it kind of mixes air with the fuel. So, you know, what we're trying to do when a carburetor sucks fuel in and air, it wants to atomize it, which means it turns it into a mist, because you don't want it being a solid liquid, because that a solid liquid tries to clean to the side of your intake and things like that, and it doesn't flow well. So you have all kinds of problems. So this is essentially, to distill this down so it's easy to understand, it's essentially just to fine-tune the secondary mixture a little bit, and, you know, help it atomize, and just kind of just a running type of a thing. Just about every Quadrajet will have this, and it comes right up. If you look over here, this is the top of these right here. Whoops, right there. See that in that corner right there? As I said before in another video, see it? And right there. See it? So if you're chasing problems, you need to make sure those things are not clogged up. I won't say that will make the 4-barrel not work right, but it wouldn't help it. So you need to make sure they're open. That's what those do. Now let's look at these that are on the far end, because these 2, the big ones right there, they aren't part of the secondary, so we're going to save those for last. But these are the secondary discharge tubes, also called pullover enrichment tubes, and these also are stuck down there. They actually live in these. Let's see that too well. They actually live in these little wells right here. Those little oblong shaped. And here's something that you absolutely, if you've got a dirty old Quadrajet, you need to understand this, and you need to check it, because it can definitely cause all kinds of issues. But these Quadrajets, most if not all of them, look down in that corner right there where my light is shining. You see that little dot? That is actually a fuel passage which goes into each of these funky shaped mini float bowl chamber things. That's what I like to call them. They probably have a name, but I call them that. So where am I? One there. There's one on that side. So if that thing gets crapped up, there's gunk in it, and it's not clear, then guess what? There's no fuel in this. So when you kick into 4-barrel and this thing is trying to do its job, which is to pull fuel and temporarily enrich the secondary side, in addition to these main nozzles, then it can't do it because there's no fuel. So where do these nozzles go? What do they do? This one in this one? Well, if you look again on the back side of your air horn, you see that little hole right there at the very front of that flap? You see that one? You see that one? That's where those two end tubes go. That one, you look, it's directly in line with that, and that one is directly in line with that one. So what happens is when this, and that's what I was saying, there's a sequence of things that have to happen here to get this thing, the 4-barrel, to work on these. And there's, you know, 2 or 3 things that have to happen simultaneously, nearly instantaneously also, and this is one of them. Rochester designed this so that when this thing goes whoop and tries to open up like that, then again, you know, it exposes this hole right there to vacuum. Now it's under that, so it's exposed to vacuum when this thing is pulling open like that, and it pulls a shot of fuel out of here. And that is simply, it's called pullover enrichment. So that means that it's almost like an accelerator pump for the secondary side. So, you know, it just, there again, it helps prevent a stumble and help prevent a bog. So something that's very common on these is that these tubes will, one or both of them will fall out. So we're going to talk more in this next segment about these and what to do about that. Okay, let's talk specifically about these pullover enrichment tubes for the secondary side. These are the ones on the far end. Now also I want to mention that not all Quadrajets will have 6 tubes. Some will only have this one and these 2 small ones. They will not have the 2 large ones. I've got 2 of them that have these, and I've got one at least out here on hand that does not. We were going to actually talk about these briefly, but not right now. Our attention is directed on these things. Now, something that commonly happens with use is that one or both of these pressed in tubes will fall out of the air horn. And when they fall out, you'll take the top off and they're just laying loose down in one of these or both of these little auxiliary float ball chambers. And for whatever reason, when that happens, these things run like crap on the secondary side. They just about will not kick in the 4-barrel. You try to do it and it just, I mean, I've heard more than one cart with that problem, and it's very apparent. It's not just a whoop. It's not that. That's a slight bog. I'm talking about there's just basically there's nothing there when you try to push it into the 4-barrel. It won't do it. So, and I mean, I'm not talking about one time and then it works good after that. I mean, I'm talking about every time, anytime, every time as you try to go in the 4-barrel, there's nothing there. It tries to go in, but there's, like, you know, essentially what's happening, there's no fuel there. So it's stumbling, and I've had, like I said, I've had viewers recently describe that problem to me. So it's a known issue, and it's not hard to fix. I know that guys tend to be fearful of taking off the air horn on one of these Quadrajets, but it's something, if you have one of these carburetors, you need to know how to do it, and I may even make a video on that soon. I've done a rebuild video which included that, but I may specifically just show you how to take the air horn off one of these. But if that's going on, you've got to go inside and look in here and see what's up. So you may have the tubes that may still be here, but they may be stopped up. That can happen. But they absolutely have to be clear, and they have to be in there. And these tubes are brass. So what happens is, if you find one laying in the bottom, find both of them in the bottom, or you know, one's out, one's in, and the one that's still there is loose. What I do, what a lot of people do, is they take and they put just a very, very skim of JB weld on the bottom of this thing, then they carefully tap it back in. You don't want to hit it so hard you smush this hole closed, because you just screwed the pooch then. So you just tap them back in and secure them with a little bit of JB weld, not enough to stop the port up, and you should be good to go. So if you have a 4-barrel that, you know, I know I'm repeating myself, but I want to make sure that you understand the distinction between the two usual situations of these things. If you have 4-barrel that it runs like crap in the 4-barrel, I mean, it's trying, but it just, there's nothing there, then I tell people in the comments, you know, I don't usually go very in depth in comments because I don't know enough about the symptoms at first, but you know, as far as the secondary side goes, and even the primary side, you know, like I was telling you about running this thing out of gas, you know, you've got to try to develop the ability to understand what you're listening to and what you're feeling as far as the way the engine's running. You know, anytime any car I've ever had, whenever I had a situation that I tried to give it gas and it would not go, or it went and then it started slowing down until it off of it, that's always a fuel flow problem. It's simply, like I said, it's simply distilled down to its basic elements. It means you're not getting the fuel flow or enough fuel flow to where you need it, either the primary side or the secondary side. So, you know, that's just it. That's the long and the short of it. If you've got one of these Quadrajets that works good on the primary side, anytime you drive it around without trying to kick it in, it works fine. Until you try to kick it and it runs like crap, then you're not getting fuel flow through somewhere in here. Either it's your little tiny transfer holes there in the float bowl I just showed you are stopped up. One or both of them are stopped up, or the two outer, one of the two outer, or both of the two outer pullover enrichment tubes fell out, or they're stopped up, or maybe these emulsion tube things, that's what I call them as a technical term for them, but air bleeds, whatever, stopped up. So that's dirt. So now let's briefly talk about what these two large ones are that are more forward. This is the forward side and this is the front here. These two are more forward. These drop, these just basically drop right down into the main fuel supply there, the float bowl. And what all these are, this is a primary. These two big center ones, that one also has them. These two big center ones, you just follow them up. You see, look right here. Well, you can't look right there because you can't see. There's no light. Click, 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 click. If you notice, if you look there, the pathway that thing sort of follows, look inside that Venturi right there. You see there's kind of a protrusion. Looks like there's a passageway would be in there below that. That's because there is. So if you turn this thing over and you're back around the front of the carburetor and you're looking down in here, hopefully with it not running, look there. We got two more small ports right there. Those are primary pullover enrichment ports. They do the exact same thing as the secondary pullover enrichment tubes that I've just talked about at length. What do? Think about what pullover enrichment means. When you give it gas, the vacuum signal pulls over the fuel and enriches it. It's like what the idea was behind that, the idea was that they could calibrate these carburetors to run leaner, which means less fuel, better fuel mileage at part throttle, which means you just cruise along at 50-55 miles an hour, not doing anything. They could run them leaner that way, but whenever you tried to push this thing to like give it, you know, go around the car or kick it into the 4-barrel, whatever, those two systems, the primary and the secondary side enrichment, kind of, how do you say that? They were kind of a crutch, which means they just, at certain intervals, in certain situations, they supplied a little bit of extra gas just so that it didn't try to lean stumble, you know. Because I'll tell you something, these carburetors, I'm going to post a link into the comments. I hope you look at that. These carburetors work very nicely, and they always did when they were in good shape and they were clean, and then when they were adjusted properly and not hacked. So they engaged the 4-barrel very smoothly. A very nice carburetor. In fact, more than one person said these carburetors are the closest thing to fuel injection without being a fuel injection. They're just a very nice carburetor. So that's why I want to take pains to help you guys understand how these things work. So that's essentially it. That's your fuel pathways, and that's what these little ports do, and that's where they can get stopped up, you know. So I'm going to clip on to the end of this. I'm going to clip on where I'm going to take my brake cleaner, and I'm going to spray through those ports just as an additional visual aid for you to show you what happens with those tubes, how the fuel comes out. So don't be afraid to tear into one of these things. If you've never worked on one, I would suggest you can get a used Quadrajet that's just a common version off eBay, cheap, like $25 or less, and get one that's all together and just practice on it. Practice taking it apart, putting it back together till you understand how all these subsystems work, because it's not black magic. It's not the black arts, you know. There's not some force in here, like I said, that's trying to make you lose screws or whatever. It's, you know, I can take one of these things apart in my sleep just about. The only thing I don't get into is I don't get into recalibrating one of them, because it's not easy on these. These are really, what you want to do is you want to, if you're building an engine that's going to use, you know, more carburetor than what you got, you need to get another one of these. And like I said, they're not expensive. There's a few that are specific to some kind of muscle car, but I think this one I got from the junkyard for like $20, and this goes to 455 ohms, and it's kind of a desirable carburetor. So, oh, and let's look at something else before we hang it up for the evening. But this is off of a 455, and I'll show you the number so you'll believe me. That number again, like the swap and shop. That number is 7042251 with a date of 0962, which means the 96th day of 1972. So this is off of 455, and I've had people ask me this, but this carburetor, if you look at my videos showing you the differences in the CFM versions of these carbs, I told you that a 750 has a solid ring around the venturi, and an 800 has no ring, but just a couple baby bumps on each side, one on each side. Well, you look down in there, clearly that has a ring all the way around. So even though this was a 455 carburetor, it still is, it's a 750, and you know, that's just the way it is. GM apparently knew what they were doing when they made the different CFMs, whether they put a 750 on it or an 800. They thought this engine needed a 750, and that's what it is. In fact, I don't remember ever seeing one of these older, the early style Oldsmobile carburetor that was an 800. There were some Buicks, but I've yet to see an Oldsmobile. Now, there's a lot of the later model Oldsmobile carburetors, the modified version, the M4, ME, and all that, MZ, that are 800s, but these are not. These are 750s. Now, for shits and giggles, excuse my language, this is a 400. This is a 400 Pontiac carburetor. This is a very good carburetor. It came on Trans Ams and some Grand Prix and all that. Now, I'm going to look down in here just because I don't remember looking at this thing recently. I don't know if you can see very well down there. You probably can't. But I see a ring down in there, so that means that this carburetor, even as high performance carburetor it is, that's a 750 also. So okay, guys, I'm starting to get a little bit hoarse from talking, and I really have enjoyed doing this video because I wanted to, when I started these videos way back, I wanted to try to eliminate some of the stigma that came with these carburetors. People that didn't understand them, and they'd heard everybody that had any kind of problem with them bash them, You know, everybody just about back in the day had an uncle or a brother or a cousin or daddy's friend or somebody like that that had one of them damn Quadrajets, and that thing ain't worth nothing. I couldn't get that thing to run right. Well, he's also the one that screwed up the linkage and got the you know, the linkage on the side over here out of adjustment and disabled the choke and all that. You know, that's exactly the person you want to listen to about advice on Quadrajets. And there's still videos of people that you know, well, I hate them things. I can't get them to work. I can't get them to work. There's a video. I'm going to post you a link in that. There's 2 videos. I'm going to put in links in the comment section, so please watch those. But there's a guy running a 1098. In this video you'll see in that link is him running that 1098 with a Quadrajet. So don't even tell me that you can't get a Quadrajet to work. It's been done. People have done it. So just, you know, don't get dismayed about this. Just understand that if you've got an older Quadrajet and it's, you know, one thing, if it's dirty on the outside, it's dirty on the inside too. And there's a lot of these carburetors around now that really need to be cleaned thoroughly. And I don't mean just spraying it out with carburetor cleaner. I mean soaked and blown out with air and made sure all the passages are clear and renewed with a kit and adjusted and put back on. And, you know, that will improve them 110%. So, you know, don't judge Quadrajets by a old dirty one that's been out of adjustment and been freed with. Don't use them as a prime example. These are a very nice carburetor that I'm a big fan of. And right now, you know, for quite a while I've not had an engine that's used a Quadrajet, and I miss that. You know, I've got an Oldsmobile out there that can't use a Quadrajet, but I'm hanging on to some of the good ones, maybe one day. So anyway, I thank you so much for watching, guys, and I hope that this has been informative and maybe not too many complaints about the camera work on these videos. But feel free to ask me questions, and I encourage you, please read through the comments and read through where I've answered questions, and read through you know, any information I've put in the video information segment. But most of all, watch the videos. Don't just watch 2 minutes of it and quit and ask me a question. You know, if you got this far, obviously you did watch it all the way through. So but I appreciate you, and thanks again for all the support and all the comments and all the questions. I've enjoyed all of it. It's been a great ride on the Quadrajet videos, and I hope to do more for you. So please contact me if you got any problems, any questions. I'll be glad to help you out. Thanks so much. Have a good one. Okay then, in this step I want to briefly demonstrate the fuel flow on the secondary side, and actually one part of the primary side on this carburetor. This is the air horn, my demonstration carburetor that I've been showing you previously, and we've got 6 tubes here, and we know that the outer 2, you got 2 sets that are in a line here kind of parallel, then you got 2 that are further forward towards the primaries. So we know already that these tubes that are where my thumb is, this one and this one, this is your secondary enrichment system. The 2 small ones inside are the air bleeds for the secondary fuel, the main nozzles, which are here. And then not all carburetors are going to have these other 2 large tubes, but these are for the primary, what's called the primary enrichment system. And I already showed you that, but we know that that's these little small drilled holes, one there and one there. So I'm going to set you up here and do my best to show you the fuel flow so we can see how the fuel is going to flow out of here. Okay, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray my brake cleaner up the primary enrichment tubes. That's the 2 large ones here, this one and this one. So I'm going to well, probably just do one, but we're just going to see if we can get you in frame there. This is not that easy to do, but we'll give it our best shot. Come on. Find the hole there. Okay. So let's see. Highly technical. Let's do a little better job here. It doesn't want to cooperate. There we go. That's what I want to do. That's not what I wanted to do. All right. Let's see. Look down in the primary venturi. Right there. Okay. Let's pause here. Okay, I'm going to do my best to show you the fuel flow. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray up one of the primary enrichment. This goes into the primary side on the air horn, so should be able to demonstrate that. And watch into the primary venturi behind the choke plate and see if you see what I'm going to show you here. See the fuel flow out of there, in this case brake cleaner. Okay, the next one I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the secondary side air bleeds, which are these two small ones here, this one and this one. So I'm going to spray up, and you should see my spray come right out of this corner right here. Try not to hit the camera with it. That was close, wasn't it? Almost got you. Let's see if I can do a little better job of that. There we go. See that? Okay, that's your air bleed, and then this is the most important one. So I'm going to do my very level best to show you. This is going to be, I'm going to spray up the secondary enrichment tubes here. This is the one that pulls over into the secondary side, which I explained to you. And that one, I'm going to pull these flaps open, and these holes are right here. Right here, you see there's a little bit of a kind of a casting, raised up part of the casting right there. So this little deal is in here. So to do this right, you're going to see what would be fuel spray out of here into this. So let's see how I do here. See that? Okay, that's how the fuel flows on these. Two large ones, which are not present on all of them. That's your primary side. It's not really part of the secondary at all. Just something to know. And then two outer ones are your secondary enrichment. That's important. Those have to work. They have to flow fuel. And then these two air bleeds, which just, you know, mix a little bit of air into the fuel mixture. Now, these are your main nozzles for the secondary side. So this is what flows all the main amount of fuel. But these two outer ones, that's what is important to help us prevent a stumble. So we'll talk more about that in the next segment.